Hey, what's up everybody? Andy here, and today we're going to be looking at the production on the track Pix Elated. I've pulled up the session file and we're just going to take a peek inside, look at some of the production things that I did for the track, and yeah, just take a look around and check things out. Hopefully you'll be able to maybe use some of these techniques in your own music, or maybe you're just curious to take a peek. So with that in mind, let's jump right in here. So we've got the session pulled up here. It's I would say, medium-sized session. That might sound a little crazy, but it is about 101 channels, which, depending on what kind of music you're doing, that could actually be pretty modest for some pop tracks. Anything that has like a really good amount of production on it could get to 100 channels pretty easily nowadays. So the way we've got this organized here, this is basically drum information up here. You can actually see subfolders on the left here, but we've got drums, we've got rhythm section stuff with the bass here. Going on through the rhythm section, we've got keys and synths in this area here. Or actually, synths are down here. And then down at the bottom, we've got vocals. All of this is vocal information. And then down here at the very bottom, we have sound effects. Maybe other people group them different ways. That's just the way that I kind of like to set up my sessions, so I know where everything is. We're going to start at the top and we're going to work our way down, and we're going to talk about what we've got going on here. So let's look first at the drums, and I use the term drums pretty loosely here because in reality it's not just a drum set, right? There's a lot of different percussive elements in there. Some of them are synthetic, some of them are real, auxiliary percussion. So these things are all working together to create the sound of the drums themselves. I like to mix samples and synthetic drum sounds with the real drum sounds to kind of create kind of a hybrid drum track, and this song is no exception to that. So let's just kind of jump into a verse here. I'm going to play a little bit of the drum soloed, and then we'll talk about a little bit here. Just basically like the groove for the verses right here. Some little percussive-y, synthy, little ear candy snuck in there, which you probably never even knew were there, adding some interesting qualities to the drums. One of the things we'll notice if we look up here at the top, this is kind of weird. I've got this set up a bit weird because I've got all my kind of synthetic drum add-ons over here. And then I've got the actual drums down below. Usually I'd have it the other way around. I'd start immediately with the acoustic drums, but for whatever reason I felt compelled to do it this way. If we look up here at the top, we've got a few different snare channels here. I was experimenting with some different snares. I like to, as I said before, pair samples with real sounds. So I've got this almost kind of like a dance snare here, real fat. Right, has a lot of body, and I've paired that with the real snare. There they are together. Complement each other pretty well, right? You can trigger snares, or you can just drag and drop them and line them up manually. But being able to mix snares together is really useful because then you can kind of create like a master snare sound that in reality is multiple snares put together, but they all sound as one. So in this case, we've got a couple different snares. Let's go ahead and hear that with the live drums here. This is actually just the drum set, right? And if we look, in addition to that snare, I've got a triggered kick here under contact kick. That was a MIDI trigger, so I used the actual kick to trigger a synthetic kick, and then I mixed them together to get that really reliable, just in-your-face, crunchy kick sound. Kicks are super important, and by triggering them and blending them with the original kick, you can make sure that you have a kick that really fits the song, that's really suitable, and cuts through the mix. Because just because you have a kick that's loud on its own, depending on the musical setting, it may not necessarily actually come to the front. Even if it has a ton of energy and a ton of loudness, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fit that particular musical situation. And so I picked this kick because it worked. It worked well. It's very loud and proud. So if we zoom a little bit further down here into the B section, let's look at what's happening in the drums over there. So I'm just going to go ahead and solo the whole drum section here. All right, this is like after the build up here. Okay, Okay, again, mixture of live and synthetic kicks. That lo-fi kind of sound is actually the full drum set, and I've just rolled off the highs. I've used a low-pass filter to give it kind of that lo-fi kind of a sound, and then I've imported again a synthetic kick for this section. It's notable too, that's actually not the same kick section from the other, or the kick sound from the other section. I like to use different kick sounds on different sections of tunes when I see fit, and in this case I've used this slightly punchier, more synthetic kind of kick for this part here, and I really like it. It punches through really nice. Halfway through this, we're going to bring in all the kicks, or not all the kicks, but the full kit. Now we can hear it all working together, right? Little snaps, claps on the 2 and the 4. If you're looking to make beats and rhythms like this, let's just go ahead and hear it with the whole group so we know where we're at in the tune. I'm going to go ahead and hit the vocal for a second. So I really love rhythms like this. For me as a writer, what I do a lot of times is if there's something in a tune or a track or a song that an artist has made that I really like, or there's some component of it that I find really interesting, I will literally take a note of it and try to kind of figure out what it is and imitate it in the music that I do. So one of the things that I do like about some drum tracks that I'm hearing nowadays is you can set this kind of 16th note undercurrent where there's a lot of activity going on the subdivision level, right? 16th notes. And then you can just put this really wide kind of hip-hop, almost like trap, halftime drum beat over the top of it. And you can make it really irregular if you want to. If you actually listen to where the kick placement is on this drum track, or on this particular beat, on this particular section, it's pretty interesting. It's a little bit different. It's definitely an irregular kick pattern that works really well. So these are great for having really active drums, but really being able to maintain a ton of space. Again, if we listen here, right? Kick is pretty active, but again, it's still leaving tons of space between that and the snare. And because we have that halftime feel, but we're still really active, we can get this really kind of floaty hip-hop thing going on, which is really fun. And if you want to take this a step further, you don't necessarily have to put the snare on the 2 and 4 like I did. You can move those snares wherever you want. I mean, you can really make, oh man, so many drum possibilities by setting that 16th note undercurrent and then trying out different kick and snare patterns that aren't necessarily typical kick and snare patterns. And as long as the music is working with that, you can get away with anything. I mean, it doesn't even have to be in 4. As long as you got those 16 notes going, it's a great feel. It's a lot of fun to do that. So there's our B section. Let's go into the C section here. The drums are very different, basically, in all of these sections here. So let's go ahead and look at our C section. Let's solo the drums for this here. Again, mixing real drums with synthetic drums. So that kind of lo-fi drum sound you're hearing in the background there, let me go ahead and solo that here. Right, those are the fake demo drums I made initially when I just made like a MIDI mock-up of the track. And I just took those, I lo-fied them, right? I just, rolled off those highs and darkened them a lot and put them on top of the actual drum set sound, and it really works together very well. 2 totally different drums going on at the same time. Of course, you want to roll off the kicks. You want to take any low-end information out of the second drum part that you're adding to it, the thing that we're doing, and making it kind of lo-fi samply sounding. You don't want those kicks occurring at the same time. You got to just commit to one kick pattern. You don't want 2 going on. But that really, really added a lot of character and just kind of grit to this drum part. And again, we're going for kind of a hip-hop thing here too, once again. lots of breaks, fun things that keep it interesting in the drums. So then we're going to come out of that section. Nice little choral sample there. Fill. And we're back into grooving, right? Got our little bit of zappy ear candy stuff going on there. So a lot of cool stuff with the drums. Again, this whole idea of mixing sample-ish sounds with the real drums. It's interesting, you know, because the project is called Sample Culture, and really a lot of that happens to do with my background in having a passion for sampled music and the way that samples sound and the textural possibilities of sampling. I've always just really loved the grit and bite of samples. And I like to take those types of sounds and create them in new music that's not necessarily using samples, right? By doing some of these things that we talked about, pairing real drums with synthetic drums, really modernizes things and makes them interesting. So let's look around a little bit further here. So we've touched a little bit on the drum track. Let's go on down here and see what we've got going on in the bass and in some of the keyboard parts. I'm going to backtrack over to the verses here. And if we look down here, we've got our bass channels. Let's just go ahead and unmute some of these guys here. And let's look at what we've got. Bass plus drums there. Teddy on bass sounding good. Check that out. So that was actually a synth bass just mixed in with it. So a lot of times what I like to do, again, it's this whole idea of pairing the organic with the synthetic. I've got real bass throughout the track, but in places where it needs a little bit of support or maybe the tone needs to be a synthesizer, we just switch right over to a synth and we switch right back to the regular bass and they work just fine. In some cases, like on a big one, I think there's a heavy emphasis on one right after that little fill there. They occur at the same time, I think. Here. We just switch right back over there. So sometimes they're actually happening together. You can totally have more than one bass sound. You can totally use synth bass and regular bass at the same time, and it creates a really cool texture. So what's most active in this particular section are keyboard parts. Right now, if you've seen the tutorial on this, you'll see me play it, or when I do it live, I usually have two keyboards. I've got a synth on top, I've got a Rhodes on the bottom, and I have them MIDI to each other so that when I play the synth on top, I also can get a Rhodes sound. And what I've done there is I've kind of taken all of the keyboard parts of the tune, and I've kind of made an amalgam of them into one keyboard part that basically summarizes all of what's going on. But in reality, there's quite a few different keyboards, kind of like Stevie Wonder's music, right? If you really dissect it, there's several keyboard channels in there working together as one. So let's take a look at that. So first, we've got kind of the foundation of this for the keyboard stuff is going to be this Rhodes bass part here. Right? Oh, that was recorded on my old Nord. God, I miss that keyboard. Nords are awesome. So I've got that, but I've actually doubled that. I've done it here in this part called Square EP. It's a synth, right? Square synth sound. Right? And they're both working together. If you hear the Square EP, it sounds a lot like a Rhodes, but it's very much obviously a synth. Let's hear that. Oh, is it muted? It's just not making sound. Hold on. Oh, it's muted during that part. Duh. Here it is. Ooh, nice. Kind of gives it a little bit of bite. Again, organic with the synthetic. Real Rhodes. Put a synth with it. Make them sound like one sound. So there's our Rhodes bass with that. And then we've got our comping and various other keyboard layers that work together on that. So let's look at that here. Just below, we've got Stab King, which is that saw synth that's stabbing along with it. Check it out. Now those same chords are also occurring on the Rhodes, so let's check that out. We're adding the Rhodes on top of that. All together. Okay, and so we're creating one part by adding a lot of similar things that are kind of, you know, converging together. And again, like I said, if you've watched that tutorial on playing the keyboard part to Pix Elated, then you'll note that I'm actually kind of combining all these parts into one cohesive piano part. Speaking of piano, there's a little piano in here too, which really adds some cool stuff. It's a piano layered on top of a Wurlitzer, and it adds a little bit of syncopated fun to it. Check it out. Here's our little lick. Here's the piano. Little fills here. So in reality, that part there is really a Rhodes, right? Paired with that stab synth doing the bright saw, and paired with a piano that's doing some of those little syncopations. And it's kind of all coming together to make this really nice keyboard layer that that works, right? They're all married together. So let's just go ahead and just hear a little bit of that all in with the vocal here, right on the verse. So I had to downsample this project because I did this whole thing at 96K, and it was getting a little bit CPU intensive. So in order to do this tutorial, I had to downsample it because I had to record the screen too, and doing a screen grab takes a little bit more CPU, and it was getting a little fussy. And sometimes when you downsample it, you end up with some artifacts. So there's a little bit of artifacts in the vocal, I just noticed there. So I apologize if you hear the vocal sound a little weird for a second. That's what you are hearing. So one thing, just like compositionally to mention too on this track, and just in general, is that, you know, this tune has 3 sections that are kind of completely different. It's a little psychotic, right? You can really get away with just about anything if you write strong melodies that can carry into that next spot, right? Or just any kind of like connective tissue, right? To get from the A to the B, we have this little metric change, and then we've got this fourths here. Then we get to where we need to be, right? And we have to take this to like a completely different place harmonically and rhythmically, and then to get out of that section into the next section, we've got this little break. And then we're into this part right there, right? Sometimes it can be done as simple as just a chord that you can use to kind of clear the air. Take a lot of stuff out of the arrangement all of a sudden and just stick in a chord that kind of comes a little bit out of nowhere, and has a quality to it that kind of presses the reset button musically. Chord that I do that a lot with, that you will immediately recognize if you pay attention to any of the harmony in these songs, is major 7th sharp 11s or major 6/9 sharp 11s. Those chords are really, really great for just laying them out, clearing the air, and then being able to take the music somewhere else musically. And you can kind of introduce them as a transition chord because maybe it's perhaps closely related to the key that you're going into, right? Like for instance, maybe you'll do a D flat major 7th sharp 11, and the tune that you're playing is actually in, oh, I don't know, B flat major. You introduce a D flat major 7th sharp 11, which is going to then take us to whatever, F minor, for instance. And the only reason why we can do that is because D flat major 7th sharp 11 can fit in the key of F minor, right? We're using that chord kind of as a stepping stone to take us from B major to F minor. That's just one example, but you could do a bunch of different examples where you use these major 7th sharp 11ths as stepping stones to go somewhere else. And I'll tell you something else too. It doesn't even necessarily have to be related to the key that you're going to. You can just use that chord to just clear the slate and just go straight to where you want to go. Sometimes you can make pretty bold modulations without really preparing them that much, especially as long as you have some kind of vocal thing that's going over the top. Your ear's just going to follow the vocal and just kind of go where it needs to go. So some good stuff to think about. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the FX channels down here. This kind of stuff is super important. This is mostly like crashes and ambience and things like that. I'm just going to solo a little bit of this for some of these sections here. Let's see what's going on here. Those big hits, right? We're looking at this information here. Epic stuff. Little sound effects. Over here, this is probably crashes, I bet. Yeah. Really big, long spill crashes going into this section. Let's hear it all together. A little bit of piano stuff going on just to kind of keep some interest here. That's another cool thing that you can do. So coming out of that metric modulation here, where we're in 4, right here. Basically like a 6/8, you can think of that. Coming out of something like that and then setting up some kind of rhythmic motive like this that's a little elusive, where you can't necessarily tell where the 1 is, that's a really great way of introducing a pattern and then firmly stating where the 1 is, and then kind of tricking people, right? It's almost kind of like a musical joke, because when you come out of this here, kind of trying to get your grip on where the time is, introducing this pattern that's kind of elusive, like where's the 1 right now, right? And then when you take that pattern, you put the drums with it, it all falls into place. A really great example of something like this is where if you maybe start a tune off with like a polyrhythm, and it's the very first thing that's heard in the tune, and maybe it's really in 3 or it's really in 4, but you're superimposing 3 on it, and then when you bring in the drums, you can tell that, you know, all the people that thought it was in 3 and it's really in 4, you know, they get to hear that against the 4, and it's a really interesting thing. There are a bunch of tunes that do that. Start off with some kind of rhythmic thing that's elusive, hard to pin down metrically, or maybe it sounds like it's in a different meter than it actually is. Then bring in the drums right away. Boom, you've already created some pretty cool interest. So it's a neat tool. It's a big truck driving by right there. Okay, so moving on, just talking about some other neat things in here. Let's go ahead and hop over to the chorus. Okay, we're going for kind of like a dirty hip-hop swing kind of thing here. Nice little synth fill there. Going on here, we've got a lot of the times what I'll basically do as a foundation is I will comp on a piano or Rhodes, especially for like R&B music, right? Rhodes is king, or some other EP like a Whirly. And then support that with a synthesizer, because I really love the expression that you get from a piano or a Rhodes. But the thing about synthesizers are they don't have the dynamic range of a piano or a Rhodes, and they don't have the level of expressive possibilities. They're also hard to voice. If you try to get away with playing some of the stuff that you play on the piano and voice it the same on a synth, it doesn't always work. Sometimes with synths, they're very registral, meaning that they may only work in a certain section for having really clean voicings, and then they become really muddy or they become too bright. So generally, it's great to get some of the more active stuff done on a piano or a Rhodes, and then just support it with a synth. So this is a good example of that. We've got here a couple synth parts. Let's check them out. A stuttery synth there, and then on top of that we've got our Rhodes, which is creating our kind of pretty R&B chords. Right? It's a great little formula. You do it all the time. Just like get a gorgeous Rhodes on there or a piano, throw a synth on there for support, and it really works well. Okay, so coming out of the chorus there, this is a perfect example of clearing the air again, right, with a unison line. So we're coming out of the chorus, and we've got this line here. It's gonna get us back to the verse. So this is another example of using some different musical devices to connect your different sections, right? Before we were talking about using certain chords that have kind of a vagueness to them to take the music somewhere. In that case, we were talking about major 7th, sharp 11th chords, right? You can just sometimes throw a major 7th, sharp 11 in there and drop everything else out and use striking chords to clear the musical air and then move the track somewhere completely different, right? And another great tool for doing that is unison lines. So unison lines are anytime you've got like a lick or a line or a melody like that that stands by itself that everything does. You can use this to connect sections. In this case, we've used it to get out of the chorus and into the verse, right? And I've set this unison line up so that it's going to land on the 5 of the key that we want to go to, which is A flat minor. The key that we're coming from before that is in the chorus. The chorus is actually not really one specific key. It's actually planed major 7ths. So in the chorus, we're going B major 7th, C major 7th, G major 7th, D major 7th. It's not really, those chords aren't all necessarily in one key, but before we go to that unison line, we set it up by going to an E flat 7, sharp 5, sharp 9. We talk about this in the Pix Elated piano tutorial, and that chord is the 5 of where we want to go. And we're using this unison line to kind of clear the air and go to where we're going, which is A flat minor. Going back to those chords on the chorus, that's another good thing to note too, is that you can take especially major 7th chords and you can plane them, which is where you're just kind of moving them around, right, using the same major 7th chord but using different starting pitches. So in this case we started on B, went up a half step to C, then we go to G, and then we go to D major 7th. And the whole chorus is just based out of those 4 major 7th chords. So you can play around with doing the same thing with like minor 9 chords. Major 7th and minor 7th chords work really well for that. So you don't necessarily have to have all this chord variety. You can just take one chord type, move it around, and get some cool possibilities. But we kind of keep coming back to this. How do you create different sections of interest in a tune and connect them and kind of marry them together? And a couple of the things that we've used in here have been clearing the air with those major 7th, sharp 11th chords and using unison lines like we've got here to get us into the verse. Some more of that down sampling. Fun. So let's just pop over to the end here. We'll be wrapping things up. So last chorus, we're going in. We've added some extra things. And just FYI, talking about clearing the air with that those major 7th, sharp 11 chords, here we are in the B section. Right. When we come out of that, we break it down right here, right? The chord that we use before we get into the B major 7th of the chorus is a C major 7, sharp 11 chord. It's actually a C major 7th. It's got a 6 and a 9 and a 2. We're just going to call it C major 7, sharp 11. So again, those sharp 11 chords are really great. Is that really in the same key as B? No, it's not. No. But we go to B, right? So you can really use those chords to your advantage. So here we are in the chorus. We've added some new things here. We've got vocal ad-libs going on from Chrissy, kind of mixing it up. We're still keeping those backup vocals going, and we've added this kind of jazzy piano, right? A little chromaticism here. Just something to make the chorus interesting. I like being progressive and changing things as the tune goes, and so especially if you got kind of like a last hurrah at the end with the chorus, add some new things on the chorus, add some kind of embellishment on the vocal, add some kind of new keyboard part, or it could have been a guitar part, it could have been anything, something, strings, whatever, just to add some excitement. So a lot of cool things that we talked about here. Big themes to take away from this is this idea of pairing the organic with the synthetic, right? Modernizing things by taking drums, but pairing them with synthetic drums, right? Taking vocals, pairing them with synths, right? I do that a lot. I'll take a synth and I'll double the vocal parts on the synthesizer. I'll mix it in there really just barely, so you can't tell where one ends and one begins. There's no tuning, there's no trickery going on with the voice, It's just being used with other modern tools to give it a different sound. We talked about kind of making things sound samply by lo-fi-ing them. You can do this by just, whatever, compressing the shit out of it and running it through a low-pass filter. And then using those sounds really delicately with the organic sounds together so that they kind of make one cohesive thing. So I hope there's some things that you learned from this, and if you got any questions or particular things that you want me to talk about with these tutorials, feel free to share in the comments or send us a message. I'll be happy to cover it for you. Until then, have a good rest of your day. See you guys.